Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So a few of you people have asked me to talk about some of my astral journeys. I'm not sure exactly where this is going to go. As you know, I never know where any of these things are going to go. I just wait for inspiration and see what comes out. It'll be fun. So I remember doing a lot of out-of-body stuff when I was younger. I mean, I first started seeing spirits when I was a kid. We've talked about that in the past, which isn't quite astral travel, but it is related to the whole concept of being able to see things, not with your physical eyes, but with your other eyes. And I remember doing a lot of flying through the solar system, which I mentioned on our last live show, where I would find comets and I would sit on them and I would fly through the air, or through space, I guess, not air, and just have fun, which was kind of cool. I thoroughly enjoyed doing that. And I would sometimes visit some of the different planets and talk to some of the beings that are there. I think it was probably when I was pretty young that I started to relate to, well, Aphrodite being my very first goddess. I started relating to the Venusian spirits pretty early on. It wasn't until later I got into some of the other planets. but you know, I would find myself in these places sometimes in dreams that weren't dreams. They felt different, and I would see things there and bring them back with me and have messages and so forth from the other side, which is sort of a part like astral travel. One of my most surprising journeys that I took going out of my body was with my first husband. I did a fair amount when we were together because I was always trying to find out where he was when he disappeared, and for some reason I was blocked and I couldn't find him, which was very upsetting. But that was probably because he was committing a crime and, you know, doing something evil at the time. But we were traveling across country and we were on a road in Tennessee on the highway, and there wasn't much to do, and I was sitting in the back seat and I was just kind of bored, and I just thought, yeah, I'll just sort of pop out of my body and just kind of wander around a little bit. And I was sort of flying over the car, just kind of relaxing, and then I thought, I've never looked under a road. I wonder what it looks like under there, and dove under the road and discovered a hidden military base, much to my surprise. And at first I was like, oh, okay, well, this is probably not a good thing. But then again, I'm invisible, so they can't see me, right? So I can just look around and see what I can find. So I started looking around. Turned out they had a psychic on staff who saw me. And I suddenly realized that I had been discovered. And then I was like, uh-oh, this is bad. So then I ran, or flew, I guess, and popped back into the car and told everybody in the car what was going on and what I'd found under the road. And we were driving over it like right now kind of thing. And they're thinking, yeah, right, uh-huh. And then we started to see these military vehicles on both sides of the highway, up in the hills, on the roads out there that you couldn't really tell were roads until there was a vehicle on them. These military jeeps kind of things. And I'm like, yep, see that? Yep, those are there. So there you go. So that was kind of interesting and, like I said, quite surprising. And I had another instance where with my first husband, in the middle of the night, I popped out of my body and I found myself floating above the earth. I was looking down on the planet, and I started seeing these streamers, like streams, rivers of energy, I guess would be a better way to describe them. They were filaments, and they were connected. They were individual pathways or vibrational differences between them of communication for different groups. It was like a telepathic network, energetic network more than one that I was seeing, and I was looking at them, and there was like a dozen or so at least that I can remember. And I thought, how interesting, because like each one thought it was separate and secure. And I thought, well, isn't that funny? Because they were like all secret societies, like the Rosicrucians and some other types, magical types. And I was just flying over them, and I could like dip down into one and kind of listen to some of the chatter and go, huh, okay, and then pop out and then go in a different one and listen to that one for a while. And apparently the Rosicrucians in this case noticed that I had violated their secret transmission corridor. I don't know what. Because all of a sudden, I was back in my room, and there was an astral form of a guy who was checking in on me to see who the heck was I and how did I get into their secret transmission. So I looked at him, he looked at me. He decided that I was probably a flake and I wasn't anything to worry about, and so he left. So I was like, okay, how interesting is that? Okay then. So that was just sort of an interesting notion that I hadn't even considered, that different groups have their own paths of mental and telepathic communication, streams of energy or so forth that they build together as a group, which actually I know more about now because there's a lot of groups that are like that. It's like you do magic together, you do ritual together and so forth, and you create a collective energy that then is a stream of energy or power or what have you that has been accumulated by all the people that are in that organization and that are doing all those things. And one of the things that happens in an initiation ceremony, if you're joining such a group, is they connect you to that stream of power. And that transforms you to a certain extent. You are suddenly have more available. Which is one of the perks of being in an organized group. Also one of the downsides, because then you can be overly influenced by the collective energy, thoughts, purpose, etc. of the people that are in the group and what the group's purpose is and where it's going and what it wants to do. So it can, if you're not ready and you're not fully in your own will, derail your own will. So there's, cautionary thing there. But I thought that was kind of entertaining. And also I met this woman when I was living in that place. And it was a not a very good neighborhood. It was pretty cheap apartments. I was pregnant with my son. We lived on the second floor, I think, in that apartment, which was kind of difficult for me going up and down the stairs as I got more and more pregnant because there was no elevator. And there were a lot of heroin addicts and whatnot that lived in that building. And there was like a roof, like the first floor had a roof that went out and was bigger, and the top floors were like, it was like a courtyard kind of thing around this roof, and you would see all these used spoons, heroin spoons and stuff like that out on the roof. So, the quality of the people, as it were, that lived there, they were in a lot of trouble. And there was this one woman who lived down the hall from me, and she was probably in her mid-40s, I would think. Didn't look all that great as far as her health, taking care of herself and so forth went. Was a little bit overweight. I think probably had some kind of health issues. And I was in her apartment one day, and she was talking about some of her unusual experiences, and she was telling me about one of her astral journeys that she had, where she found herself floating above the planet and looking down upon it and seeing how beautiful it was. And it was a lesson, important lesson for me on having assumptions about where people were at spiritually based upon how they looked. So that was interesting. It was kind of like a little ego lesson, I guess. And then there was one day, it was in the daytime, and I was out in a field somewhere, and I was seeing all these astral cords that people were out. I could see that, people were traveling, and I could see their cord. Some people have them, some people don't, but the silver cord was visible to me in this case, and there was like a whole bunch of them, and they were in different parts of the sky and different configurations and moving around. And there was a flight of birds that was going through the area with the cords, and I watched as they avoided every single cord, and I thought how fascinating that was. Their aerobatics, the movements where the flock would go up like this and then around like that and then down and split and come back up and so forth. And it was, from what I was seeing, they were avoiding these cords like they could see them, which I thought was fascinating, that they could see these things. And that was a surprise. And then there was another night. It was at night where I was looking out at the stars, and I suddenly started seeing astral travel, people that were traveling out of their bodies. I wasn't sure if they were conscious or they were dreaming, but as they traveled overhead through the sky, they left this sort of sparkling trail of color. This like glitter, kind of like moving glitter through the sky, which was just really pretty, and I liked looking at it. There was a bunch of those that I saw, and I thought, how interesting is that I could see that stuff, even though I was not out of my body at the time. And I think it's like the astral vision. What you can see when you're out of your body is one of the things that helps you to see spirits when you're in your body, if you can switch between the different kinds of vision. And that definitely helps quite a bit. So I had a couple of times where I was working really hard on trying to get out of my body consciously, on purpose, like, when I wanted to. And there was one instance that was at night. And this was after I had met two planetary beings. I met a being from Jupiter and one from Pluto. And they were working with me and talking to me about stuff. And I was trying to get out of my body. And I actually felt myself kind of peel from here down to my feet. And my conscious mind went with me. Apparently I'm really good of not taking my conscious mind with me when I do this, but I was definitely conscious at that moment. And I was very excited and happy, and of course that made my conscious mind immediately go back into my body, but it was brief but wonderful. But the interesting thing that I noticed was that even though it was dark, when I got out of my body, it wasn't in the room. There was no darkness. It wasn't a factor anymore. I could see everything perfectly well. And the other thing that I thought was interesting was that not only could I see everything, we're talking like individual motes of dust, and everything was just as clear as a bell. I also had a much wider range of sight. So I could see farther behind me. My peripheral vision was suddenly greatly expanded. There was only like a small section right behind me that I couldn't see, but I could see everything else from there all the way around. And then there was also that feeling of coldness, is how I describe it, but it isn't a cold, but it's like a breeze going through you, because you don't have a physical body. It's like the air is going through, you're going through the air. It's kind of interesting. in any event, definitely different. And I remembered when I was I was sick with the measles when I was pretty young. I had a very high fever, and I was laying on my mother's bed, it seems, and I was laying there looking up at the ceiling, and suddenly the ceiling was that far away from my face. I had like projected myself up to the ceiling, and the ceiling was really super close. And then I went back down, and then the ceiling was really far away. And that happened a lot when I had that fever, where I would suddenly find myself like right up by the ceiling, and then back down in my body and going back and forth, which was definitely interesting as an effect. And I had another thought forms exist outside of your body in the astral, and you can see them, as well as spirit beings. And at the time, there was this huge story that my first husband was trying to, like, similar to the Scientology thing, where there was like an evil empire out in the universe, and he had these soldiers, and they were after us, or something like that. And during the day, I popped out of my body. And again, everything was very, very clear, and I could see extremely well. And I was just out wandering around. I was in my room, and I looked up, and I saw my body on the bed, and I looked up, and above me was this figure of this being that had been described to me, the thing that, had like armor on, and it was a soldier kind of thing, alien of some kind, was floating above me like the same way I was. So if I'm here on the bed, it was here over above me, kind of lined up with me, and I was over here floating on the side. And I looked at that thing, and I said, well, if you're out here, I'm not staying out here. And then I went back to my body and laid on top of my body, and could still see it as I sunk back into my body, and then it went away, and I couldn't see it anymore because I was fully back in my body, which I thought was interesting. So just because you see things when you're in the astral, it doesn't mean that they're literal. They can be thought forms, things that you've got in your own mind, things you've been told. I once fell accidentally into an astral realm where comic book heroes and villains were working out their stories with each other, which I thought was fascinating. I had no idea that that could be a real place. And it was like, they were working out the story that the person who was writing them was telling, and they were trying it out to see if it worked, and giving feedback to the authors about whether this actually made sense or not. And it was all like a comic book, actually. It was like they looked like they were out of a comic book. They had all the colors and everything. It was like the whole place was like that. I was just like, whoa, alrighty then, how different that is. That's not what I expected at all. And I think Ian and I once saw this guy in one of the like metaphysical papers or whatever, was advertising he had discovered the secret to all power, blah, blah, blah. And it had to do with Carlos Castaneda and his stuff, and Don Juan kind of stuff, and he was in South America, and he had made these ancient discoveries and came upon all this stuff that everybody needed to know. And he would send you some of his information for free, like an introductory chapter. So we said sure, and he sent that to us, and we read it, and it sort of made sense. I didn't see any red flags right off the bat, so then we paid some money for the next part. And when it came, I'm reading through this thing, and this guy is talking about his very first out-of-body experience that he had. And he met this being out there that told him the secret to power was hate, and that he needed to embrace hate. And if he embraced hate, he would be all-powerful. And that was what he was doing. And so that was a definite no more from this person. And I worried greatly about this individual and what he was doing to himself and his spiritual development, that the first being he encountered when he was out of his body, he determined must be telling the truth, because there's that notion that's out there, that if something is non-corporeal, somehow it has to be truthful, which isn't really the case. You can make them tell you the truth if you know what you're doing, but they can lie, and they can lie as much as they want. It's not like there's that many, ways to know unless you're very alert. So if something doesn't make sense to you, don't do it. You don't have to do anything the Spirit tells you to do, regardless of anything else. But I'm trying to think if there's any other real interesting astral projection stories, because astral projection is a little bit different, and I know I do a lot of it when I'm sleeping. And when I'm out of my body, I like traveling through time. I do that. Travel into the future, travel into the past, look at things, and so forth. Something else that you can do when you're out of your body. But how do you do it is a whole question, and I don't know the answer to that, because I've tried some of the techniques that I've seen written about, and they don't seem to necessarily work for me. I'm still, trying to figure that out. When I was really sick, the time I was heading into the light a few years back, I was pretty much out of my body, in my body, out of my body, not attached to my body, and seeing all kinds of things, which was interesting and not scary at the time at all. Seeing microscopically, seeing my blood vessels, my lymph nodes, my lymph system, the virus in my lungs that was attacking me. Just amazing stuff. And then macroscopically, my two guardian angels that were there, that used to sleep with me every night. I remember that happening on a regular basis when I was young. One would lay on either side of me to try and comfort me, because there wasn't anything they could actually do to stop what was happening to me, but they thought that laying next to me would make me feel better. And I think it did. But yeah, so I used to think it'd be a cool thing to just be able to go visit places, and I have visited some places here and there. I had one of my shared dreams was an astral trip to the moon, where my son was, and it really wasn't a dream. We were both there, and he was getting lessons in astral projection, and I was too, but I was with a different group, because I was with the grown-ups and he was with the kids. And that was one of those times, my poor son, when I asked him how he enjoyed his flying lessons on the moon, he was like, "I didn't see you there," and I described what I saw, and he's just like, "I can't imagine what it's like to be one of my children and knowing that I can see everything they're doing, even in their sleep." Poor guys. Yeah, he was definitely not too happy about that. But yeah, that was, another time I did that, and I've taken flights to the moon on the back of a spirit dragon a couple of times during a guided journey, I guess. The things that happen to me during guided journeys are interesting. And, the question is the difference between just your imagination and an actual out-of-body experience. It seems to be really the criteria has to do with not being aware of your body at all in particular, and being completely in the new environment and having some effects, like the way you see and the feeling of the air through your non-body form, and so forth. So a lot of this stuff is subjective, interpretive, and the jury is still out on what it all means. We all have these interesting and various experiences, and as humans, we like to have a narrative that we can string together to make sense in order to make things, put them in a place, have a location, and have a series of things that happen that make a story that create this sense of control, like we understand this. In reality, we need to learn how to accept the fact that we don't really know a lot, and it's okay not to know what it means. It's okay to just experience it, and to allow yourself to experience it and not have to put it into a narrative that tells a story, because these things could potentially exist in their own unique universes, in their own unique right, without any of our explanations, and be okay. It's one of those things, we have this wanting to understand and know and explain and so forth. But really, in the end, there's very little any of us know about anything. And it's okay not to know everything and not to have a definite series of explanations to make us feel better about whatever it is we experience. That's my opinion, of course. So anyway, that's probably enough on that subject. I can't think of anything else that's popping into my head right now to say related to it. I'm sure things will occur to me when I'm done. They always do. But I hope you guys are doing extremely well and enjoying yourselves wherever you are, or surviving as well as you can wherever you are and whatever your circumstances. So this has been Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. Blessed be.